The countryside is supposed to be safe. Wide fields, empty roads, a sky big enough to swallow every worry. But when something goes wrong out here, there is no next-door neighbor to hear you scream. No streetlights, no quick help, just the slow crawl of the night, and whatever is willing to cross a field to reach your door. Tonight, we're going into 3 real cases. No legends made up on the internet. No fictional monsters. Just documented reports, police files, sworn testimony, and the kind of fear that left hardened investigators shaken. A German farm where something moved in the attic before 6 people were slaughtered. A Kentucky farmhouse besieged by figures no one could explain. And a Tennessee farm haunted, according to generations of witnesses, by a voice that could speak, curse, and claim a man's death as its own work. These are 3 true countryside horror stories, and they all begin the same way, with silence, and a long road leading away from town. Bavaria, Germany. Early 1922. About 70 kilometers north of Munich, an isolated farm known as Hinterkaifeck sat alone between forests and fields, a short walk from the tiny hamlet of Grobern. The family living there, Andreas and Kazilia Gruber, their widowed daughter Victoria, and Victoria's 2 children, were used to the quiet. Their nearest neighbors could not see the farmhouse. At night, Hinterkaifeck was just a dark shape against the trees. Months before the murders, their maid abruptly quit. According to later police summaries, she told others the house was haunted. She heard footsteps in the attic when nobody should have been there. Doors creaked open. Voices whispered at night. She was so terrified that she refused to stay. In late March, Andreas Gruber went to a neighbor with a disturbing story. He had found footprints in the fresh snow leading from the forest to his farm, but none going back. Inside, he heard footsteps overhead. A set of house keys went missing. A strange newspaper, one no one nearby subscribed to, appeared in the house. Neighbors later told investigators that Andreas mentioned these things, but refused to report them to police. He tried to laugh it off. The old man had a reputation for being harsh, not easily rattled. On March 31st, 1922, a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived for her first day of work. It would also be her last. According to the official case files and autopsy reports later summarized by German authors like Peter Luskner, this is what investigators believe happened. Sometime that evening, 4 members of the family were lured, one by one, from the house into the barn. There, in the dim light, they were struck down with a mattock, a kind of heavy farm tool. The blows were so brutal that parts of skull and hair were later found embedded in the barn's beams. Inside the house, the 2-year-old boy, Joseph, and the new maid were killed separately, also with blows to the head. And then, the farm went quiet. For days, neighbors only noticed small, unsettling details. The family didn't appear at church. The older girl, 7-year-old Kazilia, didn't attend school. Smoke rose from the chimney. The cattle were heard in the barn. The dog barked, then fell silent. Finally, on April 4th, neighbors went to check. They walked into the barn and found a stack of hay that didn't look quite right. Underneath, they discovered the bodies. Police from Munich arrived. In the barn, they performed autopsies in the cold air. According to the original investigative notes, one detail horrified even seasoned officers. The older child's body showed signs that she may have survived for hours after the first blows, tugging out her own hair in terror before finally dying. Inside the farmhouse, things were even stranger. The animals had been fed bread, had been freshly cut. Reports state that someone had apparently lived in the home for several days after the murders, using the kitchen, caring for the livestock, while 6 corpses lay only a few meters away. No money appeared to be missing. There were no clear signs of forced entry. The remote location meant there were almost no witnesses. Suspects included disgruntled relatives, farmhands, even traveling killers. Decades later, retired investigators and criminologists would still debate the case. In 2007, German police quietly re-examined the evidence using modern profiling methods. They reportedly agreed on a likely suspect, but, lacking hard proof and with all involved long dead, they refused to name the person publicly. To this day, no one has been convicted. The footsteps in the attic. The missing keys. The figure, whoever it was, who stayed in that house, listening to the wind outside and the sound of their own breathing, alone with 6 bodies in the dark Bavarian countryside. Western Kentucky, United States. August 21, 1955. The Sutton farmhouse sat in rural land between the small communities of Kelly and Hopkinsville. It was a simple wooden house surrounded by fields and outbuildings, no streetlights, no close neighbors. That evening, around sunset, a visitor named Billy Ray Taylor reportedly stepped outside to fetch water from the backyard well. According to statements later taken by local police, he looked up and saw a bright, silvery object crossing the sky, stopping above the tree line, then dropping out of sight. He ran back inside, excited and shaken, telling the others he had just seen a flying saucer. The Suttons laughed it off until the dog began to bark, then whine, then retreat under the house. As darkness fell, the group, about a dozen people, including several children, noticed a strange glow near the back of the property. According to their sworn statements, small creatures emerged from the shadows, moving toward the house. They described them as roughly 3 feet tall, with large heads, oversized eyes that seemed to glow in the dark, and arms so long their hands nearly touched the ground. Their movements were unsettling, almost weightless, as if they were gliding or bouncing. The creatures appeared to raise their hands in a gesture the witnesses could not interpret, as if in surrender, or mockery, or invitation. Terrified, the men in the house grabbed guns, a shotgun, and a .22 rifle. When one of the figures approached the back door, they fired. According to police reports later examined by UFO historian Jerome Clark, the witnesses claimed that when bullets hit the creatures, the beings did not fall like humans or animals. Instead, they seemed to spin or flip backwards, then right themselves and continue. The siege, according to the Suttons, went on for hours. Creatures peered into windows. Hands scratched at the roof at one point. A witness fired through a window at a face pressed against the glass, only for the shape to vanish without a sound. Inside, the children cried while the adults watched every door and window, waiting for the next appearance. Outside, the rural Kentucky night continued as usual. Crickets, the distant sound of animals, the heavy silence between gunshots. Around 11 p.m., the family could not take any more. They piled into 2 vehicles and drove at high speed to the Hopkinsville police station. Officers there would later describe the group as genuinely terrified, not drunk, not hysterical in a theatrical way, just deeply afraid. Within the hour, a large search party assembled. Local police, deputy sheriffs, state troopers, and military police from nearby Fort Campbell. They drove out to the Sutton farm, armed, alert, and skeptical. What they found confused them. According to contemporary newspaper reports from the Kentucky New Era and police summaries, officers discovered numerous bullet holes in the house and surrounding outbuildings, as well as spent shells on the ground. The dog was still hiding under the house, refusing to come out. They searched the fields and the roof. They found no creatures, no craft, no footprints that made sense. Some officers later mentioned a faint, eerie glow on parts of a fence and in the grass, though others denied seeing anything unusual. After several hours without incident, the police left. According to the Suttons, the creatures returned later that night, just as the family tried to settle. They said the siege continued until near dawn, with the same gliding figures appearing at windows and on the roof, then disappearing into the dark fields. No physical evidence ever proved their story. Skeptics have suggested misidentified owls, hysteria, or a hoax. But the case file ended up referenced in U.S. Air Force UFO records, and it remains one of the most famous close encounter cases in rural America. What stands out, decades later, is not just the description of the beings. It is the image of a single farmhouse, isolated. In the Kentucky countryside, surrounded by fields and blackness, its occupants certain that something was watching from the tree line, and that no one could reach them in time if they were wrong. Early 19th century, on the Red River in Robertson County, Tennessee, what is now the small town of Adams. The Bell family owned a farm there, fields, a modest house, a quiet life like many frontier families. In 1817, according to accounts collected later in Martin v. Ingram's 1894 book, An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch, strange things began to happen. John Bell, the father, reportedly saw a bizarre animal in his cornfield, something with the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit, that vanished when he fired at it. Soon after, the family began hearing knocking on the outside walls of the house at night. When they opened the door, no one was there. The knocking became scratching grew into sounds like gnawing on the bedposts, chains dragging across the floor, heavy stones dropped onto the wooden boards. According to Ingram's book and later writers like Charles Edwin Price, the youngest daughter, Betsy, started waking with handprints on her face. Her hair was pulled by unseen hands. Sometimes she was slapped hard enough to leave welts. The disturbances escalated slowly, over months and years. Whispering voices in the dark began to form words, then sentences. Eventually, the entity spoke clearly in front of multiple witnesses, identifying itself in different ways. One name it used often, according to these accounts, was Kate. Some local traditions link this to a nearby woman, Kate Batts, though historians have found no conclusive evidence she was involved. The voice mocked family members, sang hymns, quoted scripture, and reportedly repeated conversations it could not have physically overheard. Visitors came from neighboring farms and even distant towns to experience the phenomenon. Many claimed to hear the same disembodied voice, answering questions and hurling insults in a way that suggested a distinct personality. One of the most chilling aspects, reported in multiple sources, was the entity's obsession with John Bell. It insulted him constantly. It claimed it would kill him. John's health deteriorated. He developed facial twitches, trouble swallowing, and episodes where he could not speak. In December 1820, he was found in a stupor, with a mysterious vial of liquid near his bed. According to Ingram's narrative, when the family tested a drop of the liquid on a cat, the animal died. At that moment, the voice allegedly rang through the air, announcing that it had given John Bell a dose strong enough to finish him. John Bell died shortly afterward. At his funeral, Ingram writes, the invisible voice laughed and sang loudly, as mourners stood over the grave. It is important to note, modern researchers have questioned the accuracy of Ingram's book, which was published decades after the events and may have included embellishments. Some details, such as a visit from future U.S. President Andrew Jackson, are debated. But the core story of the Bell disturbances appears in multiple local histories, church records, and family traditions in the Adams area. For years after John Bell's death, people in the region reported strange sounds, voices, and apparitions near the old Bell farm. Even in the 20th and 21st centuries, visitors to the property, especially to the Bell Witch Cave on the land, have reported odd sounds, malfunctioning equipment, and a sense of being watched. These are anecdotal, but they continue to echo the older accounts. Whether one believes in a talking spirit or not, the documented part is this. A rural Tennessee farm became the center of a sustained, widely reported haunting, one that combined physical assaults, psychological torment, and an entity that claimed the power to end a man's life. What connects these three stories is not just the horror itself, but where it happened. On a German farm, something moved into the attic before the murders at Hinterkaifeck. The family spoke of footsteps and missing keys, but no one imagined 6 bodies would be found days later, with the killer apparently living among them in silence. The case left neighbors and investigators haunted for life. Some reportedly refused to go near the rebuilt site, even years later. In Kentucky, police officers and military personnel walked the Sutton property with guns drawn, unable to explain why a large rural family would shoot up their own farmhouse and then flee to town in terror. The witnesses stuck to their story for decades, often avoiding public attention because of ridicule, but never recanting. In Tennessee, the Bell Farm story became a kind of scar on local memory, part folklore, part documented testimony. Pastors, neighbors, and descendants repeated the same unnerving core, that something unseen could scratch, strike, whisper, and claim a man's death in a place that should have been safe. Real horror in the countryside is not about monsters lurking in the forest. It's about isolation. The long delay before someone checks on you. The distance between a scream and the nearest listening ear. The knowledge that, if something begins knocking on your walls, or stepping in your attic, or moving just beyond the tree line, there may be hours, days, even years before the rest of the world truly believes you. And sometimes, as with Hinterkaifeck, no one ever finds out who, or what, was really there.